Yo sering nggak mau científico por chingue. On, Tes. Oke.
Uno de los técnicos de las
Which is near the vein.
I would
There is
recommend
also like it's like in central.
Y bueno, es un poco español, aunque Anastasia es profesora asistente de la Universidad de Cornell, donde dirige su grupo de control y computación para sistemas complejos. Y su investigación se enfoca en establecer conexiones matemáticas entre el comportamiento colectivamente inteligente en sistemas biológicos y cognitivos, el diseño de comportamientos autónomos y inteligencia artificial en equipos de sistemas ingenieriles, robótica. Antes de incorporarse a Cornell, fue investigadora postdoctoral en el Instituto de Inteligencia Artificial Aplicada en Dinámica en la Universidad de Washington. Obtuvo su doctorado en la Universidad de Princeton en el 2022 y la licenciatura en Física en la Universidad de Berkeley. Su trabajo ha recibido diversos reconocimientos, un premio al mejor artículo otorgado por la Sociedad de Sistemas de Control de la IEEE, el premio otorgado por la Escuela de Princeton en Ingeniería y Ciencia Aplicada y por la Fundación Nacional de Ciencia. En esta charla, Anastasia presentará resultados sobre la toma de decisiones, de principios cognitivos sociales al diseño de la autonomía, en la que abordará el problema como un componente fundamental del comportamiento natural y autónomo. En particular, explorará principios de decisión rápida y flexible en circuito cognitivo, que se subyacen en la toma de decisiones en animales, movimientos y redes sociales de gente. Y bueno, entonces, muchas gracias. Gracias por venir here, and we also have the attention.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. And it's quite early in the year, so I appreciate your attention today. As you've heard, I'm Anastasia. I am coming from an engineering department, and I lead the group on control and computation for complex systems, where we work a lot at the intersection of behavior, complexity, nonlinear systems, and autonomy. And so today, what I'm going to talk to you about through most of the talk is some recent work we've done on embodied decision making, and in particular, how to connect things that we can learn from natural behavior and how natural behavior solves problems that are relevant to autonomy, to the design of autonomous systems that are more reliable, efficient, and sensitive. So the talk today is about multi-autonomous decision making. And so oftentimes when I talk to an engineering audience about this, this is the slide that I introduced, because this is a scenario that we all as academics encounter pretty much at every conference. Right? So you enter a seminar hall, and there's a variety of doors that you have to choose to pass through. Sometimes they lead to the same exact place. There's a line in the buffet, and there's a decision you have to make to go left or to go right. And in particular, these decisions are special because they are spatial, right? So the decisions are made not only as a choice at one instant, but in fact, the decision might be made as one is navigating their environment and learning more about the different options or the different paths they could take. And the reason this is interesting from an engineering point of view is because these types of decisions, decision making on discrete sets of options, I would argue this is a core building block of autonomy, both individual autonomy and collective autonomy. As engineers, oftentimes what we're really thinking about is how to make a decision intelligently using sensing, using computation. And this is where we have a lot to learn from biology. And part of the reason is because turns out some decision making is actually quite difficult. And in particular, the difficult decisions are ones that are not very straightforward in terms of value, right? We've all encountered situations like being at the store and having 20 different options for the same product that cost about the same. Or the door example from earlier, right? So in this case, when it is difficult to quantify the relative value of options, this is a type of mathematical symmetry. And it turns out this is quite a difficult thing for autonomous systems to overcome. So here's an example of a type of decision an autonomous system might want to make. So this is plots of two simulations, or two types of simulations of a robot trying to navigate using classical methods from engineering. What you're looking at here is a top-down view of a room. So the X and Y axes are spatial X and Y axes. The black dot here is where the robot starts. So either here or here. And then the two circles here are two navigation targets that were placed symmetrically in an environment. So, and the blue and the green traces here are individual trajectories that a robot took using one of two very standard strategies for the design of navigation algorithms. So on the left, you have something called model predictive control. On the right, you have something called potential functions. And in each case, even though there are two potential navigation goals, you see these algorithms fall into a very suboptimal behavior. They get stuck because there is an inherent symmetry to the decision they have to make in order to get somewhere they need to go. And that indecision leads them to go straight through the middle. And this is, of course, a problem if our autonomous agents navigating our environments are doing something like this. Another type of indecision you can see here. So this is a type of indecision that arises in multi-agent settings. So this is a video of a group of robots, and each one of them individually is given a very simple navigational task. So for example, the robot down here starts here and is given instructions to go up here in a straight line. But the way that their trajectory paths are planned, they intersect in the middle. And so the decision that needs to happen here is when the robot senses somebody on the left and somebody on the right, it needs to go either to the left or to the right in order to avoid a collision and remain safe. But of course, because of the symmetry of the setup, again, you see really suboptimal behavior because there was no decision-making happening here that could help the system actually overcome the symmetry it's encountered. And so this brings us to a broader question. So how can we actually understand how these types of symmetries you encounter in decision-making, especially in spatially embedded decision-making, how do they, how do biological decision makers resolve these types of issues, right? And heuristically, when we are entering the seminar hall, so here there was, in fact, 2 doors to come in. And as far as I can tell, nobody was standing in the middle and having a panic attack or which of the two to select. So there's something inherent in terms of how we break that symmetry in our cognitive circuitry. And it turns out there's some really beautiful work done recently in Constance at the Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior, led by Vivek Shrikhar and the group of Ian Cousin, that studies exactly this spatial decision-making problem in symmetric environments in a variety of different animals. So here, what I'm showing you are heat maps of experimental data from their published paper. So you're once again looking at a plot that's a top-down view for a room. X and Y axes are spatial XY axes, and now the heat maps are heat maps of trajectories. These individual insects, in this case, took in experiments. And at the 2 dots, the red dot here and the red dot here, there is some sort of a visually visible target placed. And so you see this very characteristic type of behavior as the animal moves through the room closer to the targets, where when it's very far from the targets, it is in a state of compromise, meaning that it is following not a decision, it's not navigating directly towards the target, but it seems to be navigating in this average direction of the two. But then there's some sort of a critical point, a threshold that is reached in space, at which suddenly there's a point of commitment and a decision is made. So symmetry is broken by the animal. And so this is a really beautiful paper. I highly encourage you to check it out if you haven't seen it. But this type of trajectory they've been able to observe in a variety of different animals. And since then, there's more work in that group.
Why both animals, why both insects chose the same?
So I'm not sure. So this is not my work, right?
Oh,
So you're saying why they chose the same, or why did they choose the insects?
why they chose the same?
Right. So that's what we'll get to next, actually.
Okay.
Yes, that's what the talk is about. Thank you. So, but the key point here is that there is a critical transition that seems to happen in the decision making. And furthermore, they also see that in the broader context, when you have even more than 2 options, like 3 options here, you also see these types of splittings where the trajectory seems to split into a sequence of binary decisions. And so what we want to do is understand, using mathematical modeling, what are cognitive mechanistic principles that are responsible for these types of observation, and what can we learn from them, again, to help us build autonomous systems that also can break symmetries in a similar fashion. And so our starting point for this is, again, the work done by Vivek Sridhar and Jan Cousin in the Constance group. And because in this exact work, they started asking this question and asking about, what might be a mechanistic cognitive principle that's responsible for the trajectories that we see. And an explanation they came up with has to do with a very common circuit that I'm sure people here are quite familiar with, which is the ring attractor. And so this is a group of neurons with a very characteristic connectivity with local excitation, long-range inhibition that is able to encode variables like orientation. And the observation they make is that we can couple these ring attractor type models with spatial geometry. And so here, what I'm showing you is a schematic where I imagine the animal or the moving animal is located here. And so these P vectors, Pi and Pj, are egocentric vectors that are pointing in the direction of the 2 options that is observing using vision. So it's pointing towards each of the 2. And so when the animal is far from the targets, the cosine of the angle, of the visual angle between the 2 targets observing, that is going to be positive. So the connection between these 2 will be excitatory. But when you have a large angle of vision, so as you get closer to the target, that cosine switches sign. And so in the models that they propose, in fact, this particular coupling is going to switch and become inhibitory. And so this type of switch from mutual activation to mutual inhibition that's induced by feedback with geometric location is the type of mechanism that is responsible for the splitting that we see. And it is completely mechanistic and has to do with something to do with how cognitive circuits are encoding this decision. And so here on the left here, again, I'm showing the experimental basis from that paper. On the right here, I'm showing you simulations with an Ising model, a statistical model that was built that has this type of ring attractor mechanism built in. And so the key observation here is just that this very simple rule coupled to the geometry, switching excitation to inhibition, recovers the types of trajectories that you see in animal experiments. Yes?
A very silly question,
yes.
Because I don't know anything about this. When you have 3 options, the one in the center, why the animals don't go straight to the center? Because that's what they will do.
So in some simulations, you do go straight to the center.
Yeah.
It depends on how you parameterize the model. So there's a few parameters in the model that tune how the decision making behaves. But in general, so in the work I'll talk about in a second, and I don't get into the mathematical details, but we can actually prove that this sequence happens. So basically, what in the 3-option case, you end up making a binary choice to basically split up your field of view into 2, saying, okay, I'm going to ignore things that are mostly on my right or ignore things that are mostly on my left. And then so for example, if the animal is walking this way, it can decide, okay, I'm going to ignore the one on the right. Now it's a binary choice. Now I have to make a choice between left and right here, right? So it's kind of the selective trimming of options that are at the edges of your vision. Yes.
So if I understood correctly, the mathematical model you are proposing depends on the distance. So the closer the object is from the target, the angle is wider. So that means it's inhibitory.
Yeah. Yeah. So it depends not on the distance, but on the angle, right?
The angle
but the angle is coupled
to the distance that you are from the object.
in the geometry, yeah.
So, but then once that you reach the point in which the angle is wider than that is negative, well, how is that the object makes the decision of going to the left or the right?
Yeah, great question. And and that's actually, again, this is exactly what we'll talk about next. And so to clarify, so this statistical model was proposed in the cited work, but what we've been working with some of the authors of that paper is understanding the underlying cognitive computation responsible for this using dynamical systems principles, and that's what I'll talk about in the next couple of slides. And the long story short of it is that there's a very simple mathematical story that answers exactly your question of why we actually break away from that straight line trajectory once we cross that visual threshold. Yeah, thank you. So, okay. So now I'm going to do a quick aside into bifurcation theory. Because this picture we're going to see a couple of times in the next couple of slides. So I want to spend some time explaining what you're observing. So, so this here is a diagram that shows equilibria of a dynamical system. So on the horizontal axis, we have a parameter, which could be, for example, that visual angle that we've been talking about. And the parameter is changing from left to right, it's increasing. The blue lines correspond to stable equilibria, which means that trajectories of the dynamical system are going to converge there if the parameter is constant. And the red line means trajectories will move away. And so this type of a structure, this pitchfork bifurcation, is something we can interpret as a very basic model of binary decision making, because if we think of this equilibrium on the left, that is only one as a point of indecision or compromise, and if we move left to right, the critical threshold that appears here makes the indecision equilibrium unstable and gives birth to points of decision. So this is a very basic mechanism that is encountered in a lot of dynamic models that have an odd symmetry, and this picture will exactly explain what is going on in the underlying computation. So the other way to visualize it is to think about attractor landscapes, and tuning a parameter up changes the attractor landscape of the cognitive computation from having a single minimum, which is that point of indecision or compromise, to having two minima, as shown here and here. So, so going back to our story on the spatial decision making, one of the things we can do, and again, I'll show some equations, but again, don't worry about the actual equations. The only thing I want to get across with this slide is that we can map the statistical model that the authors proposed in the animal decision-making literature to a dynamical system, which we can then analyze tools like bifurcation analysis. And so in this case, what is happening is we have an ODE that describes the neural decision dynamics. So the variable in this ODE, and it's a vector where each of the components corresponds to the activity or the firing rate of a group of neurons that is voting for a decision in favor of one particular option that is being observed by the animal. And what you get in terms of spatial movement is the velocity of the agent is then a combination of the unit vectors pointing towards different targets that is weighted by the neural activity. So if a group of neurons is voting for option 1, and for option 2, there's not very much, then the movement will be biased towards option 1.
Excuse me, what is S?
So I apologize. So S is a saturation function. Yeah. Sorry.
Is a what?
It's a saturation function, like a sigmoid. Yeah. And K is a number of options in your environment. But again, but beyond the equations, the key point here is that we have this situation where we have neural decision dynamics, which we can now describe using an ODE, and we have spatial movement, and the two are in constant feedback with each other because the neural state weighs the direction that you take at each instant as you move through space, but then as you move through space, the observations of those unit vectors that are directional change and evolve.
And N in that is also a vector.
N here.
Or up in both? In N?
Yes, both of these are the same N, and they're both vectors.
N are vectors?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're vectors, and each component is between 0 and 1 neural activity voting for each target. So if there's 2 targets, there's 2 components in N. And
the dimension of the vector is the number of points where the decision will be made.
Yeah, exactly. It's the number of potential points of navigation. Yeah, potential targets.
But you only have 2. This is the number of times you get one or the other, right?
So you only had 2 in the simulations and experiments that I showed you, but the model is actually general.
Okay.
So it handles arbitrary spatial configurations of targets. So you can imagine putting points in the plane anywhere within your vision cone. And
anywhere in the space?
Yeah, anywhere in the anywhere in the 2D plane in this particular case. But I'll show you later a 3-dimensional example as well. So yeah, great question. Any question? Oh, okay, another question. Okay.
Can you briefly explain the argument of the saturation function, please?
Yeah. So the saturation function actually, so this model is derived, again, I didn't want to go through the math to bore people, but this particular model is actually derived in the mean field of a statistical model that was proposed that was directly modeling that ring attractor circuit. So the saturation function is just a consequence of doing mean field theory on an Ising model. Yeah.
So the threshold is not the same as a Hopf bifurcation.
It is a bifurcation, but it is not a Hopf bifurcation. It's not a Hopf bifurcation, yes.
Not a stochastic fluctuation.
No. We're looking at a deterministic dynamical system model. Yes. So not stochastic fluctuations. So stochastic fluctuations were in the Ising model that I showed earlier. And in fact, they are related to a parameter here. So this temperature parameter reflects the magnitude of stochastic fluctuations in the Ising model. But because we're looking at it through mean field theory, this is going to just be an ODE with determinism. But you can think of the parameter T as basically how noisy your observations are.
Saturation can also be a symbol of learning.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, great questions. I love the questions. Thank you. And so now again, so we have this kind of coupled feedback model of spatial decision making that intertwines the neural activity with the physical movement. And what we see is, again, if we simulate this type of model as movement in space, so this is, again, that scenario with the two targets that I've been seeing over and over and over, we see exactly the type of movement traces that we expect, where starting from the origin here is a simulation of an animal or agent moving, approaching the two targets. And so here, this is the state we call compromise, where the movement is taken, at every instant during the movement, a decision is made to average the visual input and go in that direction. But there seems to be a threshold that you cross, and suddenly you have commitment. And it turns out we can actually understand this using those bifurcation diagrams I showed you earlier. Because if we look at the dynamical model of the cognitive decision that I showed on the previous slide, and we study how do its equilibria change as you vary that visual angle, which is what, so the cosine of that visual angle is on the horizontal axis here. Then you get this bifurcation diagram here. So the blue, once again, are the stable equilibria, so you expect things to converge there. And if it turns red, it's unstable. And so in this case, you have a pitchfork bifurcation, just like we saw earlier. It looks a tiny bit different because this one is actually subcritical rather than supercritical, in case there's people here that care about that detail. But the key insight is that if you look at the trajectory that is happening in the neural space, in the decision space, it is going to, as the animal moves from left to right in the plane, it's moving from left to right in this parameter axis, and the activity very quickly converges to a neighborhood of the bifurcation diagram, and it tracks it from left to right. And so as the compromised state loses stability, then the animal's cognitive dynamics very quickly converge to one of these new bistable decision attractors that were not there before. And that's exactly what triggers this transition in the spatial movement, because remember, the spatial movement is informed by the neural activity. And therefore, the two are intertwined. And so you can see this also in this maybe more visual way. So this is the same exact simulation, except with time being, actually playing forward. And here you can see that the first thing that happens is the decision in the cognitive submodel, and then the decision happens in space. And I'll play that again in case you didn't catch that. So you see, as animals moving along the compromised branch in the neural activity space, it's averaging the location of the two targets. But then once it jumps off of that branch and onto a decision equilibrium, now we have this sharp turn in space. So in some sense, these dynamics, neural decision dynamics, they give us a reduced set of coordinates through which you can understand this decision, because in space, you could be approaching it from all sorts of angles, right? But what matters is not which direction you're coming from at the target, but that visual angle.
But excuse me,
from observation.
if this is an animal or a network, this is after many trials. This is the end result.
About the after many trials.
Many trials.
So I guess maybe the clarifying thing is so this is not the result of training. This is the result of just putting it. No. So in the animal experiments, right? I don't believe there was any training, right? This is just a result of encountering two things you don't know anything about,
Okay.
right? So if there was, in fact, and I'm not showing a lot of the analysis, that does have to do with what happens if you start introducing biases. So when you start introducing biases into these types of models, what happens is, if you learn that one option is better than the other, then one of the attractors becomes shallower, and one can be even removed. And then one of these branches would disappear altogether.
So that is what I assume in these many trials.
Yeah, so if you do many trials, then yes, that's what you would expect to happen. But this is modeling the scenario where there is a symmetry, which is kind of the difficult case that I motivate.
It's already encoded.
Yeah. No.
She's modeling the first time that you are meeting, like.
Yeah. Where yes.
The first trial.
Yes, the first trial, like you don't have any.
First trial.
You don't yet have any information about which one is better. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So based on the equation that you presented in the previous slides, I assume that the turning to either the blue or red dots will depend on the initial states of the M vectors.
Yes, it's going. Yeah.
You assume random decision, so you will get either blue or red depending on the initial state.
Yeah, so there's some, yeah, exactly. So it symmetrically can go here as well, and it's kind of a 50-50 chance. So in the deterministic model, it's not, it's random in the sense that like if you choose your initial condition randomly, yes, right? But this model is actually, again, coming from a statistical physics model that was then reduced to the mean field. So in the actual Ising model, you would actually get kind of this random splitting 50-50.
And so that randomness can be, biased by which I suppose is what Jose is implying, that if an insect tends to go to the left always, then you can induce that bias into your model, right?
So we actually do, so in the, again, so I don't talk about the bias case, just not to have too many things going at once. But we do look at what happens when you do have an asymmetry, and so there is a bias. And so you actually arrive at a slightly different mean field. So you get a heterogeneity here between the different neural populations. And that induces the type of bias I was describing, where some of the coexisting attractors get shallower if they're not preferenced by the bias. That answer your question?
Okay.
Yeah. So all the modeling I'm showing you here is in that symmetric case where there is no bias. Yeah. And I'll have a small comment at the end about the effect of bias in one of the cases, but we do have in a lot of my work and our upcoming work on this, we do have a more thorough analysis of what happens with biases as well. Yeah. Great. Yeah, thanks for all the questions. This is fun. Great. And so, okay, so we've already seen all this. Again, this is our movie. So the key takeaway so far is that based on observations of behavioral experiments and seeing how animals make decisions when they encounter new options that they can't tell differences between, we arrive at this cognitive mechanism, and we understand that there is this bifurcation that inside of a cognitive circuit, that's what's helping break symmetries and actually go to one target or another. And so now, with that insight in mind, I want to come back to our technological motivation, which was this indecision problem that we encountered in robotics. And so for the last part of my talk, what I want to talk to you about is how we can use this insight about this phase transition or bifurcation to actually design decision-making in artificial agents that mimics what the animals are doing and enables us to navigate environments with symmetries without getting stuck the way the classical methods I showed on the previous slide do. And so this is work on vision-guided autonomous navigation and tracking. This is led by my PhD student, Shui Wang at Cornell, and it's done in collaboration with team University of Cambridge. And so to motivate the setup, so so all of the animal experiments I was talking about earlier were about movement in the plane. So in this work, we actually want to generalize and think about moving in 3 directions. And so the autonomous platform that we are thinking about is something like a drone. So this is I think the exact drone that they have in the lab in Cambridge. And It has an onboard camera, which it's using to sense the environment visually the same way as an animal might through its eyes. And it has some computation on board via Raspberry Pi. And so the question we were trying to get at here is, well, can we not only use this bifurcation mechanism that we saw in animals to help a robot do similar decision making, but also do this purely based on input coming from vision? And part of that is because in autonomy, the way we typically do things is the role of sensing is considered to be building maps. So you use sensing to build a map of your environment, and then you plan something through that. But we wanted to see, can we enable decision making through a purely reactive approach based on vision, and that's what we're going to do, using very similar principles as before. And so now, in this three-dimensional movement setup, we have a slight generalization of what we saw earlier. So once again, so we have an agent. Now it's a robot, not an animal, but we have a camera on board that has some field of view in terms of pixels. And with each of those pixels, we can associate a directional unit vector. So if the pixel is directly in front of the robot, it's pointing forward, and so on. So you can create a grid of unit vectors. The camera input might look something like this. So this is from a simulator environment AirGen. So this is a first-person view of what the drone might look at. And so those little green objects you see, these are what we were using as navigation targets in this visual environment. And so there's a layer of vision processing that has to happen to basically associate each pixel with a likelihood of it containing relevant information about a target towards which the robot should move. So the pixels contain evidence about goodness of a direction of movement. So here's a 2D sketch of what I mean by that. So let's say these are 5 pixels from a robot's camera. Yeah, sorry. So say this is 5 pixels from a robot's camera. So each of the P's that I'm writing here, P1, P2, P3, P4, this is a unit vector. But now we're going to modulate it. We're going to add an attention to each of these unit vectors, which makes it smaller if we're not confident there isn't relevant information contained in that pixel, and magnifies it if there is. And so now, in the previous work, in the animal modeling that I was describing, we were looking at dot products between unit vectors, but now we're going to look at dot products between weighted vectors. And so with that, we can now build a full autonomy stack from camera input, measurement of your environment, to a control loop, which incorporates the decision dynamics that contain a bifurcation diagram that I described. Again, I'm not going to go through every detail of these equations, but the point is, here this model here is a generalization of what we were studying to understand behavior of animals, and from that, using the same mechanism of just doing weighted averaging of directional vectors based on neural activity, we can now supply a velocity command to a low-level controller that then makes our drone move. And so this is a full loop from hardware to vision, back to control signal to hardware. And so here is a simulation that, again, is in this photorealistic environment that my student set up. And one really cool thing about this is, so this is a situation where you have multiple stages. So first there's two targets, then there's 1, and then there's 3. But the vision, of course, can see targets from all over the place. So you don't just see the targets that's directly in front of you, you see things in the back. So the robot doesn't know a priori how many options there are. The number of options that it has to navigate between emerges from the visual input. And so here, so you're seeing a combination. This is the field of view of the robot. So what it sees is it's moving. And so you see now it's navigating to that middle target. And once it navigates there, then it has to make a decision. And then you can see what's going on in some of that neural activity that's fed by the pixels. And so in case it was a little hard to see what was going on there, so this is the actual trajectories of that simulation. So now, again, we're moving in 3 dimensions because we're controlling a drone. So this is X, Y, and Z. And then the right-hand side is the top-down view, so it's taking away the Z dimension. So you can see the setup of the decision problem here. We're first making a decision between 2 options, then there's only 1, and then there's 3. And so, and in this case, in the animal model, the field of view was basically 360 degrees. We're thinking about this running a tractor, where you have very large ability to see things around you. With a robot, you're much more constrained, where you have now a vision cone, right? Because the camera is forward facing. So that's what these little things are. Is just showing you like the range of the sweep of what the animal can actually see. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Yeah. And so again, you can see very clearly the same type of behavior that we saw in animal decision making, where first we have an indecision or a compromise type behavior, where the animal navigates, or in this case, the robot navigates into the average direction of all the targets it's observing, but then it reaches a critical threshold, commits to a decision, and navigates to one of them, and it does so sequentially as it gets closer and closer to the various targets. But and then in the Z plane, you can also see that the movement is also bringing it closer in the vertical plane to the target. So even though all the things are in different planes, it is correctly doing that problem. So that's one example. So another example that we did was looking at a dynamic tracking problem. So here it might be a little bit hard to see because the output of the simulator was a little pixelated, but the setup is that you have three different robots here, here, and here. And you're seeing the first person view of a fourth robot, and the fourth robot wants to follow those 3. But what will happen in this simulation is the 3 robots up ahead, they're going to split up. And so the inherent decision that appears here is, who do you follow? And so that's what you will see in a second. And again, if this is a little hard to see, I will show the trajectories later. And in this case, one of the things that's different about this one than the previous one, we were using masking to figure out where are the objects. Here we're using optical flow, so you can see the input is a little bit more jittery, a little worse than the masking, but either way. So here you'll see this guy should be splitting off soon. Yep. And so now we have recentering on a target. So again, this might have been a little hard to see, and so this one, this is actually an older experiment. It looks a little jittery on the trajectory. The newer ones are a bit smoother, but I couldn't find an example in time. But you can see the trajectories of the controlled robots in this orange, and then the blue to pink is the one that is actually doing the decision making. And so you can see that there's 3 stages that it goes through, which are completely interpretable, which is just maintaining formation with or tracking the dynamic movers when it is going forward, when the group is cohesive down here. Then splitting up. So here, in this particular experiment, the 2 on the right split up from the one on the left, and so we see reliably that this type of a tracking approach will follow the bigger group. So it's going to choose the better option And then there's a secondary point of decision where the two it was following now split up again, and the decision is again made to follow. And so we've looked at a simplified model of this decision circuit that we're implementing. It turns out, back to that picture, the bifurcation diagram that we were talking about earlier, the same exact mechanism as what was governing the decision-making in animals is governing the decision-making here. So here, and this actually gets back to the point of what happens when there is a bias. So what I'm showing you here is a bifurcation diagram in two situations. So on the left is a situation where you have two input clusters that are equal. So in other words, you have a visual field in which you're seeing two identical objects that are taking up the same number of pixels, so exactly the same. And so that's our symmetric situation where you have where you have to make options between, or a choice between two identical options. And so in this case, the underlying bifurcation diagram of this this decision, where mu is related to that visual angle yet again, it has the same type of pattern we saw earlier, where there's an indecision that is broken and two options emerge, which correspond to kind of choosing one or the other. But on the right, what you see is what happens when you have two options that are not equal. So in this case, the second option, the one on the bottom, is a bit better, or maybe it's closer. In other words, you have one object that's much larger in your field of view than another. And in that case, what you see is this diagram breaks up, and the branch that corresponds, the branch of solution that corresponds to the one favored by the bias, by that input, that's the one that remains continuous. And so, if you remember from the videos that we saw with animals, we can think about moving left to right on this type of diagram. If there's a bias, what would happen is, and what does happen is, the animal's decision or the robot's decision will track this branch here, because it's going to move through this this ultra-sensitive neighborhood of the bifurcation diagram, where the decision is hypersensitive to differences in inputs. And so it's going to make the better choice, and that explains why we see that, for example, when there's two robots splitting from one, we reliably tend to follow two. And the other thing that we did was actually put this on hardware to see does this work not just in a computer simulation, but in practice. So this is experiments done by our collaborator, Eduardo Perroc, over in Cambridge University. And so you see a very similar experimental setup to those animal experiments, where so the green objects are movement targets, and on the right, on the top right, you are seeing the camera view of the drone. And here you have different experiments with the same setup, where you see this kind of 50-50 split we've been talking about between the decision to go left and the decision to go right. Of course, it's a little bit noisy, but that's actually kind of an interesting insight, because one of the things that we saw with these experiments unintentionally is that it turns out they're quite robust to noise. So you see here, the camera input that is being received by the drone is extremely jittery. That was not intentional. So our collaborator crashed the drone at the beginning of the sessions, and the cable got dislodged. And so we were getting very, very bad visual input, and somehow the trajectories that, the decision trajectories that were taken despite this very, very large level of noise were still interpretable, still replicating this symmetry breaking mechanism, and we were very, very pleased by this. Quite robust. So that's our hardware story, so I hope seeing this maybe convinced you that it's worth this crosstalk between modeling and decision making, understanding decision making animals, and understanding how to use those principles for design is a worthwhile pursuit. But in case you weren't convinced yet, I just want to give you another data point, because what we also did is we compared this decision-making strategy that is driven by a cognitive model that breaks symmetries, with a bunch of other methods from control and autonomy. So there's here, these two are model predictive control, different versions of it. One is linear, one is nonlinear. So you see, so this first one is the one you saw, get stuck in indecision. Then this one is called potential function. This is a reinforcement learning approach. All of these are to solve the same task, which is that binary decision in the plane. And then the bottom one is our neural decision controller that I was showing you. And so what we looked at, how much is first of all, does this actually solve the problem? And the answer, long story short, is most of the standard methods struggle with this setting. The only one that we could kind of get to make a decision is this nonlinear MPC on the second row. Reinforcement learning got you to a target, but it learned something that was not a decision, but just a spurious correlation. So the neural decision controller, which is what I've been showing you earlier, all the various trajectories from it, was the only one that reliably was able to make sequential decisions in this arbitrary environment. But then if you look at, so the rightmost column here is the total computation time it took on board to actually do this. And you can see it's a factor of almost 10 from the reinforcement learning, even though RL didn't actually implement the decision, and a factor of a lot more, almost 1,000 from the MPC that was doing something semi-reasonable. So there's really a computational argument for why this type of control is interesting and relevant as well, because in the end, if we want to deploy autonomous robots, we want to be able to do things in hardware and not on a computer that then sends things to the robot for a network. And at the moment, the second paradigm is how most things are done. Computational resources on board are very limited. So this crosstalk between neural decision making, understanding how these principles are encoded in the brain, how they inform animal behavior, is really fundamental to helping us build efficient, reliable autonomy, and also solve some problems like this indecision problem that standard methods actually are very challenged by. So that's the story. And again, whether we're talking about animals or robots, we're all embodied agents that make decisions, process information, and there's a lot of tools that we have in autonomy and robotics for modeling, for understanding models that are quite powerful to give us insights about behavior. But behavior is really what can help us do better in terms of design and control. And so that's the decision-making story. And so I just want to take maybe 2 more minutes and just say a couple of words about the broader work that we do in my lab. So decision-making is not the only thing that I work on. So in general, in my research group at Cornell, we work on a variety of projects that are all united by this theme of trying to understand dynamic computation control across scales and trying to bring biology and communication with control and autonomy. And so for example, a couple of projects that we have going on in addition to the spatial decision problem that we've now discussed for a long time. We're also working with a biologist at Stanford, Deborah Gordon, trying to understand the role of spatiotemporal oscillations in how collectives of ants solve distributed optimization problems in foraging. I've done quite a bit of work with a collaborator, Sebastian Mustek, on modeling stability and flexibility in cognitive control and understanding task switching humans. We also work on reservoir computing, which is a way of training neural networks that is a bit more analogous to how, plausible mechanisms through which brains might learn. So we work on the theory of that and on leveraging these types of tools in the loop for control. And I have a big body of work on collective decision making. So today I talked about individual decision making, but I also think a lot about networks and how networks help shape cognition in groups. Yes, and if any of that interests you, please come chat with me. And again, thank you for having me. And my email is on the slides. And please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always very happy to be in cross communication between fields. I think that's where the most exciting questions lie. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations. It's a nice work. I have two very general, curiosity questions. In your second slide, I guess you put among one of the decision blocks to choose a leader. So I would, leader selection. I would divide decisions in two sets. Because if I follow a leader, I don't make my decisions anymore.
Yeah.
The leader makes it.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so that model is not for that.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I think that, so this is more broadly about the type of decision making that we encounter in autonomy, right? So in general, like there's a lot of systems that are designed as leader follower systems where maybe there's one robot that can do a bit more computation, so it'll do the planning and then it tells everybody else to follow it, things like that.
So I like to make these two subsets of decisions because.
Yeah. This is not meant to be a conclusive hierarchy. No.
Because now in the world, either you follow an ideology, or you are a free thinker.
Sure.
Okay. And the second general question is that real human decisions, not animal robot decisions, real human decisions are many times involve values.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that cannot be put in those equations.
So
the Tesla cars, the problem is either I hit the old man or either I hit the baby. I mean,
yes.
That is how can you program that?
Well, I think that's not, perhaps, I hope my models are never used to choose between a baby and the...
So the problem is that real human decisions always involve, well, not always, but in many occasions involve values.
Yeah.
And I don't, it's still a problem. I mean, I know that there are many people in AI trying to use models of ethical decisions, but I still cannot make my mind and how can that be done?
Ooh, I think that's a much longer conversation, right? But yeah, I think maybe this type of modeling is really about reactive decision making that happens in a quick succession, right? Not necessarily.
So actually, if I'm an Ukrainian, I would like to know how to cheat the robots.
How to cheat a robot.
So maybe your work has some tips about that. I could. you can really make how the robot go to the wrong place.
How to make a robot go to the wrong place?
The best angle, the largest target.
Well, I mean, I guess if you're asking about the very specific setup we had, then you would, I don't know, you could put something that looks like a target, like a piece of paper, right? Like it depends on, for example, the vision component, right? So we purposefully did not want to deal with vision processing in this, so we used out-of-the-box standard methods that are plug and play. But I think the answer to your question is going to depend on what type of visual processing you use to then inform the attention mechanism. Yeah.
Thank you. So about the second question of Jose, I think values in the mathematical models will be translated as bias.
Yeah.
So you can weight more certain decisions, or your neurons will have higher values in one particular object over the other one. So that's, I will see that easily implemented. So values are not so hard. I mean, bias is.
I mean, economists have that kind of theories, but I don't know if outside economy or marketing you can do that.
And not specifically about values, but we did have some work some years ago on understanding these types of bifurcation mechanisms when there's also a game theoretic mechanism that's developing a bias. So game theory is in one way that these types of payoffs are encoded. So we do have a paper on that, on how, for example, social dilemmas might induce biases in the decision and how to understand that. So yeah, I think
that was a comment for Jose's question, but I had a question,
okay.
Commentary for your work. Movement is not exclusive of animals.
Yes.
Molecules also move. And even though that there are no neurons behind the movement of molecules, the way in which molecules move within a cell determines whatever the cell is going to be doing. And I'm wondering if you are considering using your models to replicate molecular movements.
So I have not thought about molecular movements, but I do have we do have a collaboration with that we're starting up with several groups at Cornell that's at the level of cells. So we are thinking about decision making in cellular collective and how various different types of signaling can bias the decision and cause transitions, things like that. So I've not thought about molecules.
Or cells. Cells is the same in development.
Sure.
The fate of an organism depends on the movement of cells, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I fully agree. Yeah. So I do have some. I do not have results. I do have some ongoing projects on various different mechanisms at the level of cells.
Have you thought about introducing noise to your model? Because when you presented the images from the jittery, but it kind of seemed that it changed a bit, like the perceived distance to the objects, and I was wondering if that has to do with the decision that the robot is making. Because actually introducing a little bit of noise in a system of decisions in which both of the options are equal seems like something that could help you get to a decision faster.
Yeah, and that's a really good insight. So in practice, while we do the modeling of the process, the purely deterministic one, partially because of the simplicity of analysis, implementation, and so on. In practice, in robotic hardware, for example, noise is always going to be there because sensing is noisy. If you're doing instrumentation, there's noise. There's just so many different, even if you're driving in a straight line, there's no floor that's completely straight, right? So there's just sources of noise and imperfection coming from all over the place. So the cool thing about these bifurcation diagrams is they're very, very robust in the sense that you can understand, if you to introduce noise to this type of model, you would make it a stochastic differential equation. So you'd add some sort of a diffusion term. And so bifurcation diagrams like this have been studied in the presence of stochastic diffusion. And so the general intuition is as long as the noise is not too large, you basically get a concentration near where the equilibria are. So you still expect this to happen. But your insight is actually really important, which is that noise can't, so this here in the middle is an unstable equilibrium. So in deterministic limits, the dynamics can get kind of stuck there. But when you have noise, it can actually help push you out of that area. So in practice, the fact that real systems are noisy is actually useful in breaking the symmetry. Yeah.
Two questions. The first is very nice work, and I think maybe are familiar with the work of Lipson Lab.
On which lab?
Like cell awareness machine.
Hudlipson? In Colombia? Yes, now I know Hudlipson.
Machine, no? Two different parts. One in which you are self-aware as humans or machines, that you need to recognize yourself and then recognize the environment. And the other that you can take decisions based in rules. Do you have comments how that two can relate to each other?
So decision based on rules versus what was the first one? Sorry.
Be self-aware, to be self-aware and recognize yourself, and the other is to recognize your environment or based in rules, take decisions. Because you can take you can have decision making without really recognize yourself, right?
Okay.
And you can have self-recognition without really basic decision making.
So I think maybe what you're alluding to is something like planning, right? Like, so here we're talking about the purely reactive decision making, right? I think the notion of self-awareness is forecasting what the consequences of a decision are and adjusting plan accordingly. So here again, we're really not introducing planning into the picture, but you probably could. I don't know. I have to think about that one, but maybe we can chat afterwards.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's most related, like thinking about like I don't know, the 3 laws of robotics, no, like sci-fi style. No?
Sure.
First, like the rules that you can do to do a decision making, but then like if you can predict the behavior in a big crowd or simple decisions, no? When you have like the 3 robots and then one is kind of attracting the others,
Yeah.
in terms of predicting the behavior of a crowd or one individual.
So, sorry, what was the question?
Could you apply these?
To a social setting? Yeah. So actually the bulk of my work is on collective decision making. So the answer is yes. So you can start understanding collective decisions and how social interactions shape collective decisions using very similar mathematical mechanisms to this. And so yeah, I'm happy to chat about it afterwards. I don't want to take too long, but yeah, we have a whole bunch of work on that question. Yeah.
Thank you for a very nice talk. So you're using like the icing model, which is basically a phenomenological representation, right, of what is going on in decision making. But I was wondering if there is any evidence in the neural circuits of the insects that you took as an example, if there is like a double negative feedback or something like this giving rise to this toggle switch behavior.
So I know that the ring attractor circuit has been found in a variety of different animals. I'm not an expert in biology, so I don't have it off the top of my head whether it has been found for these particular ones. But I think in the fly, yes, but I'm not sure about the locust. But I think going in, this was a kind of a hypothesis that this is the type of mechanism that is responsible for the symmetry breaking. And one of the nice things about Vivek's and Dan's and Ian's work is, like, you know, with this very simple icing model of this cognitive circuit, they found that they basically just have to fit 2 parameters to the behavior to very, very closely match what's going on with the experiments, and not just in one species, but across many species of animals. So to me, it's a compelling argument that there seems to be this universal for other, for lack of better words, mechanism that's going on. But I'm sure the details of the implementation with the mechanism and the circuits of the different animals is, you know, going to be different. Yeah.
Another question? Anastasia, do you have more plans to look at the? I really like to look at the biology and from there infer how to translate that to robotics or to. Do you have any more plans of doing that with future or in the future, looking at another biological?
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of this work on decision making is ongoing, and so in my group we're absolutely doing that, and decision making, task allocation. So some of the work that I mentioned with Deborah Gordon on foraging in ants, or at the moment it's a collaboration with a biologist that's on the side of modeling and trying to understand how these how oscillatory spatiotemporal oscillations contribute to a computation. But the hope is to eventually, you know, think something similar about coordination of multi-robot systems and things like that. So I think this translation of things from natural to autonomous behavior and, you know, back and forth, that's very core to the research program that I have at Cornell. So it's something I hope to think about for a very long time. Yeah.
Entendí